Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for attending this forum. Welcome to Penang Institute. It's very heartwarming to see all of you interested in the topic on Monday evening. It's been a very long day for me, and so it's very nice to see people coming at this time of the week. It's a very important and very interesting topic that we'll be addressing by our guest from Australia. My name is Fawaz Abdulaziz. I'm an analyst with Penang Institute in the Department of History and Regional Studies. Yes, so let's go into the topic straight away. The guest that we have tonight, addressing us tonight, is Giselle Sim. She's a researcher with she's a Vocational Education and Training Research Fellow, or we know it here in Malaysia as TVET, research fellow at the International Specialised Skills Institute that is based in Melbourne, Australia. Just to very briefly look at or rather, let me start by raising some of the questions that Giselle will be addressing tonight. How do emotions dictate our actions? How do they impact on our ability to make informed, logical decisions? And ultimately, how do emotions determine how much and what we learn? So there is an approach called social and emotional learning, SEL, that has become a best practice for education around the world, because it recognizes that for most, if not all students, life is not left at the doors of the classroom for the students that come in to learn. So, for example, past traumas, challenging and difficult circumstances, even life itself comes into the classroom with every student. Just on a personal note, I know that the challenge that I have as a PhD student is life itself. Life is getting in the way of my being able to complete my PhD dissertation. And these are just everyday challenges. But perhaps what Giselle will be talking about are students who might be facing more serious challenges affecting them on an everyday in everyday life. So how do learning environments affect students, even those not even aware of the influence that emotions exercise on their choices and behavior? So with that very brief introduction, let me call upon Giselle Sim to present to give her talk.
Yep, and we can all hear me. Perfect. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's wonderful to see everyone here. I didn't know what I would expect tonight, as it's my first sort of big presentation overseas, and it's actually the first time I've left Australia. So I've been outside of Australia the past month, travelling across Europe, more particularly northern Italy, researching SEL, social and emotional learning, to improve classroom practices back home in Australia, as Fawaz explained. So why am I here? Researching. I've got a background in anthropology. What is that? Study of humans. So I did a couple degrees in that, focusing in medical anthropology. So I once wanted to know, how do we understand why are we sick? What does being sick mean? But then we got to a point just before COVID where the medical jobs dried up and then people weren't interested. And then I had a colleague who said, Giselle, you're wanted in education. We've got a manager here that really needs research because no one wants to look after these students. And I thought, I don't know, I'm not a teacher, I'm not an educator. No, it's the same thing. Give it a go. And I did. And it was the same thing. It was medical and trauma all in one, with people trying to get through with their lives. So I moved into education, and then we realised there was a lack of credibility in low socioeconomic communities in improving education practice back in Geelong, Australia. So we were not getting any funding or any help from government and other organisations. We were just told to let it be. Work it out yourself, it doesn't exist. So with that problem, I applied with the International Specialised Skills Institute, so that's ISI for short. They offer Australians grants to travel overseas to learn new and better practices to bring home to Australia. So with that, I applied for the education one. We offer many other grants for other issues such as aged care and sustainability. And I was fortunate enough to win the education one. So I'm interested also in why people came out tonight. What was your interest in hearing what the topic was? I understand I'm putting people on the spot. It may be scary to speak out right now, but if anyone's brave, do you want to shout out to me why we're here at all? Or raise your hand? Why we're interested? I ask this because I never approach a classroom with every student assuming what's going on that lesson. Everyone's got a different story to tell. And that's why I have this slide here for cultural context. Why? Because we all come from a different life story. Yes, we're all the same as humans, but we're also all different. We all have a history. We all have a way we see the world, and that may be very different from one person to the other. And I think that's really important, because I find that that topic alone causes a lot of conflict in my classrooms. With that, that is within the context of Australia, and I do give a bit of a warning that that may not be applicable or make any sense here, as I've learnt travelling to different countries. What I say and what I mean could make no sense, and I'm not offended in any way if someone wants to call out and go, what does that mean? Because I may use slang that I don't realise is slang from back home. And it may not have any importance to maybe what you're here to learn tonight, and that's okay too. And something that's been really important in Australia is we are all custodians and owners of the culture we come from. So that's been a growing discourse back home, that we do own where we come from. And like I said, if what I say doesn't make sense, I'm happy to have questions. So, Australia. Everyone familiar with Australia? What it looks like, where it is? Some places I've visited don't know where it is. It's the far end of the earth. So here we are. Most people live in Sydney and Melbourne. And then Geelong is right there, an hour west of Melbourne. So most people probably have heard of Melbourne, but we probably don't know Geelong. Many years ago in the mid-1800s, there was a bit of a fight for these two and one other regional town to be the capital, but Melbourne won. Some Geelong people like to think we were almost there, but anyway. This is a classic shot of a typical Geelong scene. Here we are on the waterfront, the carousel and the bay, usually used for a lot of tourist advertising. Looks very nice, very appealing. More, we have these, they call them bollards. Apparently it's a big tourist attraction where there are 50 plus different painted characters. Some people find it fun to walk and follow them. And then we have the town, the old market square. Those are very common images you will see of Geelong, and they look like a tourist destination. But it's not. It's a regional town, and it looks nice, but it does have its own underbelly. So Historically, Geelong has been a town of manual labour workers. They have worked in factories, hands-on, building cars, refining aluminium, building houses, what have you. However, in the last few decades, all of those industries have become automated. A lot of people have lost jobs, and they have traditionally been trained just to use their hands, and now they're being told to look for jobs in an office. But I don't know how to read or write. I don't know how to use a computer. Where do we go? In the northern suburbs of Geelong particularly, along with a few other spots in Geelong, there's a limited access to certain infrastructure. So there's limited medical help. Just before I left as well, we've had another hospital shut down maternity services. So we're in a critical shortage of, if you're pregnant, you probably have to go to Melbourne in most cases. It's not looking good. Public transport in the north as well. You can't really get around if you don't have a car. In some spots, it's very difficult. And then you have, with all that, you have very limited prospects for young people. So it's a difficult place, despite the pretty pictures and maybe the ideas some people have of Australia as being this amazing place or this great destination. It's so beautiful, which it is a beautiful country, but it also comes with its problems too. So I wanted to give a bit more context with the socioeconomic background of Australia in its current form. So I have some data from the last Australian Bureau of Statistics census, which has been collated into local government areas. And I have here 5 being the most advantaged to 1 being the most disadvantaged. So we go from red to disadvantaged to blue. So most of the red is where we don't have a big population, that is desert. And then we of course have a lot of blue all around here where I am, and of course in Sydney. However, that looks a bit deceiving. We've got Geelong all in blue being advantaged, and that's what some people like it to be for funding. But it's not. So I've broken it down to Melbourne and Geelong. So Melbourne, Geelong. Right here, where all this red is, that's where my community centre is, and that's where all my cohort is. Half of that in the yellow. So again, red, not good, green, good. We have half of that red, more red over here, and then mostly yellow over here. We have a bit of green in the middle, where the holiday destination is, and also where Deakin University is. But most of Geelong is not good, which a lot of Geelong people don't like me admitting. Okay, so here's Cloverdale Community Centre. So they were in the north, in all that red. And we are a community centre with Neighbourhood Houses Victoria. What does that mean? That is a collection and group of community and neighbourhood houses that offer services to their local area. Most community centres in Australia usually tailor to maybe the elderly looking for something to do, maybe social groups, 2 hours a week. We're a bit different. So we don't have the sort of normal retired old people that come here. We have the whole community where they're in need. We have migrants, we have people with disabilities, we have young people who don't have a chance in school that need help. But we also host a lot of community events too, to keep that connection. We have classes to help those that need to step up into TVET courses. Classes range from using computers. So if you have never used a computer before, you can come in, and one of us, myself as well, has taught this, never used a computer before, and we try and get you there. And that could be very scary for some people. Most students believe they'll blow it up. Room hire, so we try and make some money through room hire, because we do have, it looks a bit deceiving. It's small, but we do go deep back. We've got 4 big rooms, 4 function rooms, sort of like this here. So we do have the occasional talks as well with what we're doing tonight. Social gatherings, so we can have other community services. We have even hosted memorial services as well. So if it's a safe space for the community that they want to choose to have a little wedding or have a little funeral, we have done that. And then we have a small allied health centre. So allied health is the word we use in Australia to mean a medical service that isn't invasive on the body or directly a doctor. So that would be a physiotherapist, some nurses that aren't going to directly cut into your skin. They might be doing other things that are more maybe wound cleaning or dressing, but not in a hospital setting. So health that does not require a hospital or a doctor's office. What else would focus in there? So we have occupational therapy as well, the use of assistive technologies or what have you. Psychology is the main allied health service that we have coming out of this centre. So we've found psychology being a big need for our cohort, but going into a psychology office can be very scary and very stigmatising because no one wants to be seen as crazy. Because there's that stigma of you are crazy if you're going to see a psychologist. So what did we do? We have psychologists hidden in a community centre where you go for fun activities and nobody needs to know. You can come in and it's a discreet office for you to go see a psychologist. And then of course we have Learn Local. Learn Local is pre-accredited training that we offer and run that is a stepping stone into what you would know as TVET that would otherwise refuse you entry. So what Learn Local is if you have dropped out early and cannot get into TVET or for any other reason you have been refused enrolment into TVET, we will try and help you with a course before then as much as you need to at least get you into an enrolment, and it may take 6 months or a year. We partner with local TVET organisations to liaise with trying to get that student to where they need to go or what they want to do. Part of pre-accredited training is it's not formalised. It is up to us to choose how we make classes and how we run them because every term is different, every class is different. Teachers do not need a qualification for teaching because it is not accredited. Teachers just need to prove they know the subject matter. So, part of the reason why I'm doing this research is because as I've been teaching Learn Local classes, so I have been teaching computers, I have been teaching English as a second language, I have found multiple barriers to teaching. So number one has definitely been vicarious trauma, and trauma is always a ghost that looms over someone's body when it's not addressed, and it will follow them their whole lives. We have a lot of food shortage in our community and food scarcity, so that can stop people coming into the classroom if you're hungry. And then no clean clothing, again, that can stop you coming in. Housing instability, we have a growing number of homelessness because we have a critical shortage of homes in Australia too, which has been worsened by the pandemic. Domestic violence is a growing issue in our northern suburbs, so we don't have students coming in if there's a threat of violence or death coming from home. And then we also have modern slavery. So unfortunately, we do have a cohort in the northern suburbs that have a group that they liaise with from Thailand to get girls to come over here with the promise of everything in Australia, because how great's Australia, again, tricked by the beautiful pictures, and then they get caught here and their passports taken off them. And then it becomes a real big issue from there. So fortunately, we had a wellbeing and social worker officer who started with us, who herself was Thai and a victim of this. So we've got the perfect subject matter expert that's been the best help to the community to navigate that we put someone who knows what they're doing at the forefront of fixing the problem. And what we've found is that triage assistant is key. By that, I mean, I can't teach a classroom by myself. I need to have more people in the classroom with me, such as that girl that knows what she's doing when it comes to helping modern slavery. If I'm in a classroom teaching computers and someone comes in and has a tantrum over something that had happened in their home the day before, I need a mental health professional to help liaise with that student. If you're hungry, or you need coupons for medicine, I need a social worker that has those connections with the government to give you food stamps or to give you medicine stamps. So then you're at least able to come to class. So we don't get a lot of support in our community centre. It's mostly run on volunteers, and all volunteers are amazing. We have an issue with funding. So our community centre is government funded by local government. So in Australia, we have 3 tiers: federal, which was all of Australia, the state, which is Victoria, and then local, which is Geelong. So we don't get much funding, and we have a big issue with anyone believing us that these problems exist, because the government and other people sometimes don't want to hear what we have to say, because it tarnishes those beautiful pictures and what Geelong's supposed to be. And a lot of Geelong people wouldn't be happy with me saying that. We tell people what they need. We need to tell people. What happens is they're telling people what they need and that they are at fault, rather than us listening to what people need and how they got to the place they are to begin with, which is probably not through their fault. It's usually a cascade of problems that come through life, as vicarious trauma does. So with all of these issues, we found some ways that we could start tackling them, which was having people come into the classroom with me, which was me stopping students when they would start disrupting, and we would remove them so they didn't hurt others, and then they could have time to themselves, and then we would talk it out. And we would talk it out over multiple sessions. We wouldn't just talk on that day. We may even talk over 2 weeks, 4 weeks, what have you. And how we would do that is with the volunteers and what we have established as the wellbeing team. So the wellbeing team are students which are on placement. So in Australia, depending on what course you're doing, if you're going to do any sort of medicine or community work, you need to have an X amount of time you have worked for no money in the place of work. So we have mental health students, we have social worker students, community worker students, that they need to get X amount of hours to pass their course. And that's how we survive, with one professional overlooking them all. So we had that method, but we couldn't get anyone else to believe us that works, because we want other places to do something similar, that you can't just have a teacher looking after all the students. You need to have others. You need a wellbeing team. So my boss at Cloverdale, she applied and successfully won a fellowship with the International Specialised Skills Institute in 2019, where she went to Canada and Detroit in America to study how to get people to come to class. And then my work is to follow how to keep people to stay in class. So we're pushing for the triage and talking methods. And I'm meeting with researchers and teachers in Europe and other places around the world I've spoken to in the past 2 years regarding this issue. And I was fortunate to have one researcher in Italy point me to SEL, social and emotional learning, which matches very closely to what we're trying to do, but we had no structure to what we were doing. We were just trying to do our own thing. So what is SEL? SEL is a pioneered evidence-based research out of Yale University in the US, which has been led by Professor Mark Brackett, who founded the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence, and his book, Permission to Feel, I would recommend. That's a very good start to this. So what that means is he argues emotions dictate every action we do. We are not rational thinkers. We don't plan anything out. If we feel angry, we're going for what our anger tells us. If we feel sad, we're going to sit in our sadness. It doesn't matter what rational thought is. You will always pick emotion, and you will argue that your emotion is rational. So his book starts with trying to learn how and why emotions affect our lives, and we need to acknowledge the feelings before they take over us, whether they explode or whether they paralyze us. And also we need to find a way to pause too and really reflect on what's going on. With the SEL method, it's very theoretical based. It uses tools such as the ruler method and the meta moment method, and they're the main research strategies that have been used out of America. So ruler breaks it down into the 5 steps to stop and regulate your emotions. As recognize first when an issue happens, recognize how you feel, whether it's in yourself or you're reading someone else. So we might have an explosion or an argument in the family maybe. Are we able to stop and realize who is angry, who is sad, why? And then work out why that emotion has come from, where it's come from, and what is emotion trying to tell us. Anger isn't just anger itself. Anger may be a sign for you that your barrier has been breached. Maybe someone's crossed the line. Why are you sad? Maybe because you've got too much on your plate and you just can't move anymore. That's why you're paralyzed. Emotions are trying to tell us something, and the theory is that we wouldn't have emotions if they weren't useful. Then we label them because words have power. Can we put a word to how we feel and give it context? Then we need to express it after we've got words to it and get it out of our system, because it can't stay in the body, because you will either be paralyzed, explode, or you won't be able to self-regulate. Then you get to regulate, and you got to work out strategies that works for yourself so that explosion or that paralysis does not happen again. It's very hard to do. It's very, very hard to do. And I've spent the last 9 months really trying to work this out even in my own brain and my own life, because it's all beautifully put there in theory, but are we able to stop and have the meta moment? What's that? The moment before you may erupt in an argument. The moment before you may do something that could end a friendship or end ties with a family member, or maybe end things with the in-laws. This is really important, and it really is in the book for us not to skip over any chance to stop and have a serious conversation. Are we able to go in an argument to say, what are we doing here? What's going on? What's our 2 points? Why do we feel hurt? Are we able to be honest with ourselves and move on from that? It's very hard to do, and there is never a right time to have that conversation. This is by no means by no means easy. So it's about thinking instead of reacting. And it's almost impossible for some. I find it impossible sometimes too. So after covering all the theory from America, I linked in with sources across northern Italy who have been partnering with UNESCO in schools there to research the theory itself. So it's being used in American schools, and others in Europe have gone, okay, let's try and use this, but not for children. Let's apply it to adults too. Let's try it in TVET. Let's try it in our schools, and let's try it in a different cultural context, because culture means everything. And what I found, as these are the 3 brief topics that I really found the most obvious, and what was said to me in northern Italy, that education should be care, education should be community, and if you want to have control over your finances, make education your enterprise. Don't wait for funding. So here I am outside of ENAC, the main office in northern Italy in Verona, and I travelled there in the last few weeks. And ENAC represents 82 schools and 10 vet sectors across Italy. So that's just in Italy alone. They also have sister schools in different countries. They are a not-for-profit and private organisation that also includes research to improve education practice. So they have taken on the job to look at cell research practices within their organisation. With that, they also have control in how they train their own teachers in education practice. So this place is a little bit different. They are a building that it's many years old. It's a few centuries old, and it's still run by Catholic nuns to this day who teach in that school. And they have found that so they found CEL, like I said, was too much theory. If I'm a teacher and I need to work out problems in the classroom now, I can't really grab something from that theory to sort out now. I need an example of an activity I can do in the classroom to stop a problem from happening. And they've been researching partnered with the Catholic University in Brescia. So Brescia was just a little bit an hour's drive from Verona, and they had some very interesting finds in their research. So they partnered with many schools across Europe in what they can do for fun and games to get students building a community before anything goes wrong. So they told me that they had even success in having escape rooms with all the students together and trying to work out these sort of situations where they're in fear of their life or trying to disarm a fake bomb. And they found that to be very, very beneficial for their students to work with social and emotional learning, because they had to learn how to read others, to listen, to speak properly and not explode in their own emotions when someone else wasn't listening. So they get those practices in school instead of you go off as an adult where you haven't learnt those skills and then you have meltdowns in your personal life. They also found community problem solving was very beneficial for the local area. So that would mean, how do we address maybe a big rubbish problem in the local area? How do we address loneliness in our area? And they would get the kids to come together with community groups to start planning different events or situations that they could put themselves in to help that, maybe fundraise for an issue. And they found that to be very beneficial too for their cultural context. And they also partnered with anywhere else they could get people to want to buy in to help as well, which that depends on cultural context. I couldn't see that happening in other places in the world necessarily, but of course that was working for them in northern Italy. So here I've got a picture from inside the monastery. It was very beautiful and undergoing restoration, and we had nuns walking around there, but in the classrooms themselves, they were very modern. You had the beautiful exterior, but you had a modern classroom with everything in there. So they were very well equipped. And then we went to Cometa International. So that was in Como, Italy. And they definitely taught me the lesson, education must be enterprise. So they did not rely on any money from anyone else. They had many shops, many businesses, many cafes. They all had under their control, where they were able to employ their own students and persons with disabilities to get a job and work and get their experience and also learn the social and emotional skills while under their care. And I had never seen anything like it, that they were making their own money from all of these places across Como, and then they were able to reinvest that in their own education practice. So they were able to sustain without any need of government or grants. They are completely self-sustaining, and they have been in existence since the early 90s. And that was unheard of to me. And then they went on to partner with large businesses in the community. So they had partnerships with I forget the designer brand now, but they had some designer brands based in Milan that they were even running cafes with. One store wants to go in and build a business and employ their students, then another one does, then another one does, while keeping their branding on all those shop fronts. So here I've got pictures of different shops and different cafes they have around Como. And what I found interesting as well was that all the material that has built up all these cafes and shops are also made by their students too in the workshops, where they're doing woodwork and metalwork. So even the benches, even all their light fixtures, it's all reclaimed materials. They've all recycled everything, and it's teaching other students to manufacture things too, which I thought was very beautiful. And here I've got more of the site. They've got their handmade, beautiful interior chapel they've got on site. They've got this beautiful garden area where they also have on site fostering and adoption. So they have underage children who don't have families where they look after. And even here they've got their hall that they have gatherings and food there. One of their key messages at Como was everything needs to be beautiful. Everything. You come into class, everything's got to be beautiful. You've got to take care of everything because you're beautiful too. Because a lot of orphans and a lot of students in disadvantage weren't believing that. And if you don't believe you're beautiful and if you don't have a vision, you're not going anywhere in life. Now that was something I hadn't heard of anywhere too. A positive message for someone who was in a disadvantaged environment. Then I've got the workshop, the wood workshop. everything organised. I'd never seen that before. That was part of their beauty. And they even had handmade these musical notes. And everywhere I went in Como, they were very keen to show me every bathroom because they've dressed up and put art in all their bathrooms that were vastly different. And here they were. This was one of their star bathrooms with the paintwork on the inside. The buildings are heritage listed, so you're actually not allowed to touch or change them, except the bathrooms. So they keep the inside nice, but the moment you go to the toilet, it's a different world. All done by the students. And then these chairs as well, they were very keen to show me that this is a new design, all in one. You can't really see it well here, but it's a specially built swivel chair, all on its own with that tabletop, and you can make any configuration of classroom you want with ease. And they were very lightweight. As a teacher myself, having to get to the classroom an hour early to move tables all the time, I was very jealous of those. So with that, I wanted to cover what do you do with all that now with Sal. And I really wanted to get the key message across that it's never too late to have a conversation, and it's really important to have a serious conversation sometimes. And I always like to ask people if you can identify where there's been a situation in your life where you could have removed yourself and thought. And it's really important to teach everyone when you get a chance, can we stop and think what we're doing? Can we see how an emotion may affect us? It's very hard to do. Can we see, are we angry all the time? Are we exploding all the time? Are we sad all the time? And how does that dictate your actions? And we really need to learn new strategies in our emotional awareness and how that affects us. A lot of young people are often not taught to understand how they feel. And that has been my key problem in classrooms, is I have all these young people who don't know what's going on in their life. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know how life will look like because they've never been taught how to feel or given the permission to feel. So with that, I wanted to hear from you, from what didn't make sense, what you think of Sal, and how you think that may or may not reflect in your life.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Giselle, for that amazing presentation. And it seems obvious. At times it seems obvious, but it doesn't seem to be realized in many circumstances that there are a lot of hurt people out there.
Yes.
Whether they're children or young adults or adults
Or elderly.
or elderly, even if they're not, how do we say, damaged in a way that completely stops them from learning and improving themselves, but there's a certain damage that affects their ability to live life to the fullest.
Most certainly.
And I think it's an issue that I feel. I mean, with a lot of people talking about mental health and the importance of mental health and so on, I still feel like we don't seem to be addressing these fundamental issues and challenges that students of all ages face. If you can just bear with me, I was a teacher for a few years, and just a simple example of how when a student is, for example, shamed, or when the teacher gets unable to control himself or herself, and in order to get a point across, gives negative, makes a negative remark to the student, the student's anger or shame actually gets in the way of them learning something. There's something within us that stops us from learning when we are ashamed or angered or emotionally they're emotional. And so I think it's a very important topic, and issues that you're addressing, the social and emotional aspects of learning that I think needs to be talked about more. And that's what I appreciate about your talk. Before I open the floor to others, I also want to take advantage of my position here, to ask and maybe get you to clarify a bit more on SEL, on ruler, and meta moments. Um, the last school that you were talking about, Cometa International, is a fascinating example of this attempt to implement SEL and ruler
And community connection.
and community connection in their own particular circumstance. Number one, my question is, who do the schools cater to? Are they migrants? If they are, where do they come from? Or are they local residents? And maybe if you can remember these questions,
Of course.
what are some of the challenges that they face in these schools? What are some of the problems that the students have that get in the way of learning, and how do they approach it? What are some of the success stories, and perhaps what are some of the, not to say failures, but
Where have they
an
gotten stuck?
ongoing
Ongoing
problem
challenges.
that they face?
So I've found problems around the world in many other schools I've spoken to. We all have the same problems, but for these two schools that I went to, for Cometa, their main cohorts were more intellectual and mental disabilities, a little bit of physical disabilities, and they were mainly younger people from that 15 to 25 age bracket that needed a chance in further education after school, and then training and employment where otherwise they would not have a chance. So they had a lot of people with autism spectrum disorder and a lot of intellectual disabilities, where many schools in Australia, in the Australian context, if you have something like that, you usually get pushed out of the system. And it seemed to be similar where they were coming from, that most mainstream schools were not prepared to deal with intellectual disability, which required an extra person to sit down and go through the alphabet a few more times than maybe the other students, or maybe rewrite things a few times. It doesn't need to be that hard, but it is a bit of extra work. And Cometa were willing and able, and have continued to be able to facilitate that extra hands-on approach in their work. So they had, instead of using words and writing, which doesn't work and it's not accessible, they would have pictures. They would have a series of pictures to illustrate the process. So with those students with intellectual disability in the kitchen, doing kitchen work in those cafes, you had the pictured process of how to clean up after the day. You had a pictured process in how to set up for the day, how to switch off the electricity, all that sort of thing. And you would rehearse that with the teachers so you were fine to do it on your own eventually. And same with the shops as well. They had physical shops that would sell handbags and clothes and all that too, which was amazing to see. And for some of those students that they needed a bit of help with, you had the pictures as well to go through that process in the warehouse. So that was the main cohort for Cometa. At Verona, they were a bit different again, that they were a bit more localised. It was different with each different school they had. So when I was in Verona, it was mainly just anyone in the local area. It wasn't very specific, it was just locals. And Cometa had a few migrants. They didn't have an exact identity of migrants, just people from really anywhere, whereas in Australia we definitely have particular large groups that we can really tailor for. So that was that experience in Cometa, and then it was the success stories and some roadblocks, correct? So they have had, in Cometa, they have had a lot of success in building up their support and employment for intellectual disabilities and other mental and mind disabilities, which I had never seen before. It made me so happy to see that people who just needed a little bit of extra help could work very well in meaningful jobs and be treated like another person in society. I have not seen that in Australia. Usually in Australia, there's some really poor programs where you put to factory jobs with very low money, and here these people were earning an honest, fair wage for a fair day's work. And I think it's definitely a process that can be replicated elsewhere. Some of the problems that they have, like everyone does, is of course continuing the funding, but I think they've been very successful in that. And then for Verona, they've had success stories in implementing new cell trials that they have made cell more practical, playing games with students and trying to get everyone to learn each other's names and who they are and get to be more friendly and cohesive within the first week of terms, because you need to nip it in the bud now instead of allowing classes to go on and maybe disagreements to happen or fallouts to happen, or at least for teachers to learn maybe a student needs a special care plan, to really get to know each student and to try and intervene before a problem happens, which Cometa was doing too, that they had full profiles for each individual student for any known issues, and all staff were to be on board with that, not just having one teacher in the classroom, but they also had disability specialists and social workers with a master's level involved in some of these courses, which I had not seen before either. So they were able to intervene and know what to do before any problem happened. And everyone else knew too. So if there was a medical condition, people were able to intervene if a medical episode happened as well, which I would have thought would have been straightforward back home, but that can even be an issue too. And I was amazed with that.
Just a follow-up question. It just kind of, what your research and what your work suggests, I wonder if, like here in Malaysia, for example, if we can address the social and emotional aspects of learning, or rather the social and emotional challenges that our young people, our children, our young people, and even adults face, would it translate into better in academic performance, more passes, for example, or higher rates of higher grades? I don't mean to make more passes and higher grades to be the end all be all of education, but just as addressing the challenges that I wonder, the social and emotional challenges that I wonder are the real obstacles to our students getting better, performing better, for example. Is that a fair assessment? Or?
I think the theory of CEL is ingrained to give those people that don't get a chance to at least have a chance, definitely. So anything distracting that comes up with emotions is supposed to be negated by following certain practices, and that would give that a chance. For others who maybe do pass, could maybe even do better if certain distractions in their lives were helped instead of hindered. I think a lot of people could even do better, but of course that's not the be-all and end-all. The whole purpose of CEL, yes, you get through school, but education is not just for that job at the end of the line. It's not just for that one career. Education is for life, and that's the crux of CEL as well, that it doesn't set you up to get through that term of school. It's supposed to set you up for how you react throughout your whole life. It's supposed to help you with your relations with your spouse, with your siblings, with your parents. How do you talk with people who are difficult? Can you identify when there's a reoccurring pattern in a dysfunctional relationship, and can you actually have a conversation to fix it or at least help it? Or rather, do you need to walk away? And then learn how to look after yourself and not have that hold on to you and distract you as much. Things still hurt. Things definitely still hurt. And it's not about, wishing it all away and no pain is real. It's definitely about accepting it and taking it on, but not letting it hold you down. Allow you to still be able to finish that course instead of deciding, I'll stay home today because I can't get food on the table. Rather, now I can learn where I can get that help, or get vouchers from us at the community centre, for example, or start to prioritise how can I fix a problem instead of giving into the emotion of paralysis, for example.
Just one last, I remembered what my, usually English teachers are the most interesting teachers that we have in schools, secondary schools, right? And I remember we finished our exams and there was still 1 month to go before the end of the semester. And so when we finished the exams, my teacher said, okay, now how do I put it politely? Now the BS has ended. Real learning can happen in the classroom. So he was happy that the exams are over and he can actually speak to us, and teach us or talk about life issues and life skills that you kind of ignored during the preoccupation with academic performance. Am I in the right general area
Yes.
of concern?
On that topic, that was a frequent issue that got brought up to the group at ENAC in Verona, Italy, when they would go to teaching conferences and try and push that message into social and emotional learning for teachers to push in their classrooms. Teachers went, we've got all the exams we've got to meet, we've got all this minimum criteria we've got to do, we've got these marks we've got to get for maths and science. I don't have time for me to teach students how they should care or not care about what, or how they should feel. Well, what they found is they would start putting it in for a minimum of a few hours here and there within the first week, and they broke it down as lesson plans, which I have as attachments, not with this, but within my records, that are publicly accessible on their website. So I would recommend visiting their website, where they have explicit breakdown activities. So what you could do is maybe practice with a bit of visualising and art, or maybe introducing who you are and some random facts about you, which can definitely be an icebreaker challenge from when you've got a first day class, but tweak it in a bit that actually makes it a bit more meaningful, not just ticking that box, and then pepper it into other classes. And part of that was they were pushing for it to go into maths and science classes too, so at least 10 minutes here and there to do it. Don't just focus on we've got to get through all this and get to the exam, because the exam will not carry you through your life in 10, 20, 30 years' time. You won't even remember that exam. You won't remember the score you got unless it was very bad.
But I mean, it's not to undermine the importance of these things, but perhaps what I get from you is that if we can address the social and emotional needs of students, they might be able to even perform
Yes.
better academically, but generally in life itself. So it's about skills for life that will enable you not just to perform better in exams, but to do better in life and to face challenges that will get thrown at you in life as a whole. Right?
I can't speak for any other country or any other place other than where I've come from, but we weren't taught how to talk to people. We were taught please and thank you, but we weren't taught how to communicate. We were not taught how to do conflict resolution. We were not taught when to say, oh, I feel really angry, let's stop talking about this topic, it hurts, before erupting into a fight. It's those basic things that if given a little bit of time to teach, even 10 minutes, could make a big difference into conflict resolution throughout life, which is very important for the workplace and would make much more cohesive workplaces. I think that hasn't had much research either, which the book I referenced, Permission to Feel, its last chapter, its last few pages just touches on the workforce after school, that the workforce is dictated purely by emotion. I think that's definitely in need of research with this too.
So again, I just wonder, like, if we implement or we pay more attention to social and emotional challenges that our children and our young people face, I wonder if we'd be giving them, better and more skills to do well in life. And the exams and certificates and qualifications might be part of that, but I wonder if it would work in Malaysia, and I wish it would be, if we can try, experiment. And anyway, enough with my questions. I've hogged the mic for long. Are there any questions from the floor, from the audience? We'll take them one by one. So the gentleman in front, and then I have the lady at the back for the second question. Go ahead. Please state your name or if you're okay with it, your name and your organization or where you're from generally. Where do you live?
All right, this is Andrew here. Well, I guess, I might be a bit academic now. I guess the core of the SEL is, and also adding to his point that willing to push SEL to the community level. But I guess the things that I've yet seen in your presentation is probably it has something to do with the cultural conceptualization on the social and emotional competency of the community, and then top down, zoom down to the individual in order for all this to work, right? I mean, yeah, I know I'm a bit academic here, but yeah, that's the core, and it is also related to SEL, I think. Yeah. So, yep.
Yeah, that's why a lot of other countries in Europe are starting to trial now, because that has been a big critique outside of America, is that's all great and well for you, but it's different everywhere. Culture does have a big influence on life. And yes, it's America, but in Australia, we're not the same. And that's why I've gone to see how it's working. That's where it's been a bit different. I found in Italy, they had a much bigger focus on community connection. So with all the theory and the other examples I saw in America first, they were just focused in their own school. I didn't really see any examples of them going to different community centres or going to aged care facilities or going out into nature, maybe picking up rubbish or planting trees like other places do. But Italy, they found for them, and a few other places in Europe, we can't be in the classroom. We need to go out and connect with other places and community members. And that's how they did their SEL. And again, that may not work elsewhere too. That may be a European only thing. We've found for us in Australia, we need to have one-on-one talks and chats for that to work with us. We need to have one-on-one connection with student and teacher, and to really have a deep and meaningful conversation, because that's very taboo in Australian culture, to actually say what you feel. You're supposed to be very stoic, very rugged, very nothing harms me. You're not allowed to be honest with anything negative in our cultural context. And I think the social and emotional learning really needs a lot of evidence base in many other cultural contexts. And I would have no idea how that may well play out in Malaysia or other areas neighbouring by, because it's really what is important to the community here, socially and emotionally. So in America, they found it was conflict between students was really important to work out. So they focused more on that. In Europe, they found it was needing to connect and reach out. So there wasn't as much conflict, but there was a lot more keeping to myself. And then in Australia, again, it's a mix of keeping to myself, or maybe I might be a bit too rude and brash. That's another issue we have, and I'm yet to find examples of where there can be really rude students. How do you deal with them? Because that can be my problem, is I can have a really disruptive, rude student that could really harm and put trauma on other students. And that's something I want to start practicing and trialling when I go home to my community centre and to my local area too, is to really push that and try and start getting some credibility happening back home. But I think it would take, of course, it would take years to work that out. But I suppose for Malaysians yourselves, you would know best what's important to you and what needs to be covered here, what you believe was lacking in your time in school too. I suppose that's a question to pose to yourselves, because you, as I said in the beginning, you own your culture, you know best what you need. No one else should tell you what you need, you know.
Maybe we can move to the second question, the lady at the back.
Hi, Giselle. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yes, okay. My name is Rahula. I am a lecturer in a college. So I teach pre-service ECE students. So students who are studying to become kindergarten teachers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present my question and then I'll give you the context. So my question is, based on what you know about CEL, do you think it's something I should look into? Okay, so that's my question. Now here's my context. So I had experience working in a kindergarten, and I found that I'd be able to service my community better by helping train other teachers. And something that I realized is many of my students are still coming out of the generation where there was not a lot of attention paid to matters of the heart. So there was a lot of authoritarian parenting. And so they come into class with a lot of fear of authority. And so when I try, like for example, if I ask them, how are you feeling today? They're thinking, what is the right answer? So it's very difficult for me to have a real conversation with them. And so then when I try to teach them about how to deal with children, how to help children emotionally, how to help them through a breakdown, why it's important to let them cry, why you should never say, it's okay, nothing's wrong. When I try to teach that to them, I feel like they don't understand what I'm saying because nobody ever gave them that space. So can I use CEL to help them? Because I don't know about CEL enough. Yes.
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for the work you do. You're in a very beautiful position. It must be hard, but you're in a beautiful position to be in. From the very beginning of Professor Mark Brackett's book, he says, we can't help any child if we can't help ourselves. We need to heal ourselves, we need to put labels to our emotions, and we can't act in a world through our reactions. Having said that, that's still hard, and I can definitely sympathise with many of your students who go, oh, I don't know. So culturally in Australia, a greeting could be, oh yeah, hi, how you going? And you're supposed to say, yeah, all right. You're not supposed to say, oh, I just lost my dog. Oh, my car broke down this morning and I'm so angry I could punch someone in the face. Or, you know, I've been having a really hard 3 months and I really struggled to get out of bed today and I don't want to shower. You're not allowed to say any of that. Once my little brother did speak back to a teacher that way and said, yes, I'm really sad. And he got told off and said, no, you say, when I go, how are you? You go, good, thank you. That's the only responsible answer. How do you unlearn that? That's very difficult. I think you've got to give them permission to know that it can be different, even if you just start with that. Just by introducing the very idea or notion that your life and your view does not have to be that way. You can't necessarily push further than that sometimes. It can take weeks and months. So are you working with people for extended amounts of time? You're with them for 2 years. So, okay, that's good. You're not with them for a few days or weeks. So the only way to even make a start would be to build rapport with individual people and having those conversations one-on-one before or after class sometimes. Or if you can get those one-on-ones, or if you can make soft little activities in your classroom. I would recommend looking into the work the theoretical side of the work out of America. I think you may find some things more tailored to you through their websites, and then you work out how you see fit. Take what you like and leave the rest. You don't need to follow any protocol to the T. You do what you think is comfortable for your students. Not saying it's a fix, but I think it might be worth a try, or just to at least unlearn that learning. I think if you just do that, that's a step in the right direction. That's already sell. If you're telling your students it doesn't have to be that way, that's sell.
This conversation reminds me also of the challenge that I saw during my undergrad days in learning Arabic. For example, I started learning Arabic later than most Malaysian students. Most Malay students, many Malay students learn Arabic from very early on. So they've studied Arabic for 10 years, for example, before they go into the university. But they still couldn't speak it. They learned the rules, but they couldn't speak it. And one reason that I found that they couldn't go beyond a certain level is because whenever they try to speak and they make a mistake, then their friends would either make fun of them, or they would say, like, for example, if I speak English, I'm learning English, I speak English, they say, whoa, like, jangan pandai-pandai, don't try to be better than who you are, or who do you think you are? You're better than us, you're speaking English now. Their classmates are not trying to be better than them, they're just trying to learn the language, and in order to learn the language, you need to speak it and practice it with the risk that you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Embarrassing mistakes, but that seems to be an obstacle to many students because they don't want to make mistakes, number one, and number two, they don't want to be put down by their fellow students and by their friends. So perhaps this is one social and emotional challenge that we need to unlearn as students in order for us to learn what we need, life skills and other things that we need to be taught. Sorry, that was my interjection again. Are there any other questions from the floor? Or yep, the lady in white. Yeah. Are there also any questions online? Okay, perhaps after the ladies ask a question, we can take one from Facebook or YouTube.
Hello.
Hi.
I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you because this has been a bit an eye-opening talk. I'm not in education, I'm a dentist, but I somehow managed to, I feel like I can take away something out of this because I feel like I can empathize better with other people because in my line of work, I still occasionally need to hire school leavers, and there is an age gap or a generation gap. And then I start to realize that some of these young school leavers who just enter the workforce, I get to know them a bit better and then realize we all come from very different backgrounds, social backgrounds, economic backgrounds. So when I try to train them for something, and if they do make a mistake, and I'm very surprised by the way they apologize. They'll say, I'm so sorry, I'm so stupid, I'm so stupid. Like I had one staff literally say, I'm so sorry, I know I'm very stupid. But but as I get to know the person and realize that during her school time, she had a lot of obstacles socially or economically. And then I just wish that things could have been better for her. Yeah. So thank you so much for allowing me to soak in all of this and try to empathize with other people.
Most certainly, that life story for that student has led her to believe that I am the stupid person in that. Did you say you were a dentist? Sorry, was that a dentist? I would also put this to the patients you deal with too, not so much the students. I don't know here, but I know a lot of people back home that have absolute trauma with dentistry and teeth work, and I know many people who will avoid it for 10 years if they have to, because a lot of trauma gets held here. I feel like I'm the only person who might be okay with it back home because it's so expensive, so I feel like it's a luxury. But I think it would even be worth seeing that and practicing some of that with the people that you have come in, to really stop and talk with them slowly just to see how they feel, explain everything you're going to do, and even if it's just a little look, or I'm just going to scrape this, not going to actually cause harm to you, I would see there's more power in that. But even teaching that to students as well would be beneficial, and then slowly show them and unlearn that lifelong learning that was wrong to begin with. Yeah.
Chill and I'm just here for a checkup, but because they're really scared at home, they don't want to express that. So sometimes something gets lost in the way, and then it's very hard to build a relationship. Yeah.
You may find it beneficial to ask the questions they should be asking to them, so they may be too afraid to, but in a way you are in a position of power as a medical practitioner to a patient. It may be worth, if your gut feeling is telling you, oh, this question should be asked, they should be asking me this, go, hey, are you feeling such and such as well? Something softer like that, and you can pull away if it doesn't make sense or doesn't work, but it wouldn't hurt to try to ask the question you think they're thinking too. And that's up.
Can I just add something? I have a lecturer's voice. Okay.
We need the
Oh, you're recording. Okay. All right. I'm not sure if you're aware that WHO and UNICEF have put together a module on cell. I looked it up some time ago because, I was a teacher educator. I'm a retired lecturer. I was a teacher educator, and I actually emphasized on the emotional skills or emotional intelligence because it's very important. You notice that most institutions, as you rightly mentioned, they focus mainly on cognitive skills. And of course, we need the cognitive skills, but there should be a balance between emotional skills. And I call these emotional skills pedagogy of the heart. Actually, I mean, that's how I term it. And I mentioned this just 2 weeks ago. I was asked to give a talk to all prefects in the schools in Penang. And I talked about this and said that emotional skills actually form the basis for good communication skills in different contexts, in varying contexts. And as you mentioned rightly again, if you look at our Malaysian philosophy of education, it's all there. It's all there. Holistic development of a child. And I like the fact that you mentioned education, the emphasis on care, because Latin educare, that's what it means, to mold, to bring out the best, as you mentioned just now, to help them develop to their fullest. But the thing is, always the academic aspect is emphasized more. And as you mentioned, teachers don't have time. They say, oh, we must cover the syllabus. And I always joke with them, cover. Yeah, cover. You're supposed to uncover, not really cover. You know what I mean? So, yes, and these skills are there, and they're known as life skills, as you mentioned just now. They're also known as 21st century skills. So they are there in the education curriculum, except that teachers don't emphasize because nobody has told them to do that, or some of them might be aware, but it's like touch and go kind of thing. So the emphasis is mainly on academic skills. But as you again, you mentioned, it does help to break barriers, because if the child is not learning, there is something amiss, and it might just be this SEL approach is not applied there. So that's all I wanted to say. And I think many teacher educators like me, because we used to talk about this at our meetings, and we try to instill this in the student teachers. But when they go out and they're qualified and they start teaching, they're overwhelmed with all the policies and the academic requirements and all that. So just gets pushed to the side. Yeah.
Teachers don't need any more work than what they already have. Yeah. And that is why we've been pushing at Cloverdale and elsewhere. We need extra staff on board. Teachers need work taken off them. It needs to be made easier for them. They're working overtime after and before classes. It's not fair. I love that pedagogy of the heart. But to that point with it's too hard to cover it, the education as care came from ENAC in Verona. So they don't see education as getting that job. They take it very seriously that we've got to care for our students for life, for what we're teaching them here, so they can go on to be successful in many elements of their life. And they found that some arguments why it's not covered is because it's easier to measure and test 2 + 2 = 4. It's easy for me to go, it's right, or 2 + 2 = 5 is wrong. Easy. It's very hard sometimes for me to put a mark on who knows how to speak nicely to who. But they have been trialling how to mark that, and they have found some success in making very structured classroom games, and you're to watch how each one speaks to who. It's not about who is successful in solving these puzzles or disarming these fake bombs. It's about how you got there. And then they measure that, and that becomes the achievable outcomes and how people communicate. So even in my time at university, part of the marking of that sort of work, you had to communicate on a sort of social media board that was only visible to your group and the teacher. So they could actually see the communication. They're not going to mark the final product of the project that you all present. They want to know how you got there and if one person was doing all the work or if you learnt to work together, the process. So you can measure the process. It just needs the time to do that. And that's the social and emotional part, is the process.
Can we have the question from online?
Hi, Giselle, Fawaz. Okay, so I'm going to read the comment and also the question from our online audience by the name of Hyo Nakagiri, who commented that the insight, the humility, and the compassion is overflowing tonight. Right? And the question is, do you think the perspectives and wisdom you shared tonight can help solve the political or geopolitical tension that has engulfed so many societies or nations? And if yes, how?
That's a really big suggestion. Well, I do think if everyone started in their life to at least know how to speak to each other, I think the world would be a much better place. I think a lot of the issues that grow up to be big fights or wars even are definitely from poor communication or lack of communication entirely. I do believe a lot of people don't know how to speak to each other. I do believe there is a big lack of manners and understanding. This is from my worldview. I can't speak for anything outside of Victoria, Australia. Everyone can give that answer to wherever you're from in the world. But from my perspective, I think we need to be teaching people from a young age how to communicate and how to read others' faces and voices and the words they say by listening to. We only seem to hear we don't all listen sometimes. There's a big difference between hearing and listening, and that would solve a lot of conflict. I can't promise large-scale conflict resolution, but I think these processes would definitely stop classroom fallouts and toxic workplaces, at least some toxic workplaces.
It also reminds me of, it's a joke. It's a joke of a Muslim going through Ireland, and he gets stopped at a roadblock. So the policeman asks him, "Are you Catholic or Protestant?" And the Muslim says, I'm Muslim." And then the police officer says, No, are you Catholic or Protestant?" So it's a mental block in which people cannot see beyond the blocks that have been constructed in front of them. So if those blocks, whether it's lack of confidence or inability to communicate, can be lifted, I believe that these conflicts around the world, geopolitical conflicts, if not national conflicts and local conflicts, can be alleviated. I mean, won't be eliminated, but I believe it's, this sounds like a recipe for at least decreasing some of the problems that we have in society. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
At least on a local level. I think that's something really important everyone needs to focus on, is not one person can fix the world, but you do have control over your little world. You do have some control over maybe where you live, even if it's just maybe a small little bedroom or 1 by 1 metre of some space. You at least have control over something little, even if it's yourself or your internal thoughts. And if that's all you have, then that's all you can do. The more bigger you aim for control, the less you'll be able to. And that is what social and emotional learning is you unfold that, you go, I can't control other people. I can't control how someone else will react to what I say, but I can control how I react, or maybe what I say or think. And then also, like that example of, are you Catholic or Protestant? You can't argue with stupid sometimes. Then there's the choice of, maybe I just can't talk with this person at all, so I will just leave them alone, instead of causing more conflict by trying to argue to them that as a Muslim I exist, for example.
Any other questions from the floor? We were slated to finish at 9:30, but if there are more questions and more interest and more comments that you'd like to, I think we can go beyond 9:30. But if not, we can end at 9:30.
I guess before intervention is done, I guess the access. The access has to be first. Like, how much you know about your community, then you start intervention. Otherwise, it will be a waste of resource. Hey, I know you're recording. So in short, it boils down to the social and emotional competency of the community. And so, as usual, you assess before you intervene. So I guess we need to actually explore on cultural conceptualization of what the community think about what is the social or emotional competency of the people surrounding. Of course, it's a bit irony in the sense that sometimes it's way on the both sides. You need to access it first, or you just start doing so, or you access it first. It's actually 2 ways, you see, because if you start doing it, then of course you increase the competency of that area, you see. So yeah. My 2 cents.
Yeah, doing whatever the community chooses feels right. Sometimes putting a name or using a formal name from a far off country makes no point at all. We're just going to have our social circles, and that's fine. Or we're going to have our little get-togethers, or whatever we want to call it. You do what you feel fit. It doesn't need to have a label, while other people do need a label. But it's really up to communities to choose and try what they need, and also up to those in power to listen to those on the ground, which is what we always, that's our problem back home, is we'll say, we need funding for English as a second language. No, you don't. Well, yes, we do. How do you know? That's one of the many examples of being told by someone who doesn't know. That doesn't help any problem. And that's applicable everywhere. This is not just education. But I think definitely for education, teachers need to be heard. And I think a lot of teachers have been speaking out for so long. And that's why in Australia, many have retired and quit. And many teachers aren't lasting within a decade of once they're qualified back in Australia. I don't know for here. But that's why we've got a shortage, is because they're not being heard and they've got too much work and they need help. And we've got to listen.
Like I said, we're slated to end at 9:30, but if there are more comments and questions that, you know, the audience can't help but want to express and want to ask, we can go further. I have a lot more stories on my part, but I won't take too much advantage of having the mic. Yep, one more question.
Previously, that there is a platform or a website that has specific lesson plans broken down, like 10-minute lessons for SEL. Could I have the name of that platform? I missed it.
I will need to double check that after this to give you the right link. If you're okay to stay behind for a bit, and I can
Sure.
point you to the website. I don't have it attached to this because I forgot that at the last minute.
Okay, sure.
But I can point you to that, and there are many, that has been compiled by many different schools throughout Europe, and that also has email addresses and the professionals assigned to each of those different little courses and activities attached to that. And you are more than welcome to reach out to them as well for extra communication or clarification. I was told they would be more than happy to speak to others. So you'll also have that resource too, if that is appropriate for you.
That's great. Thank you.
You can also check out that WHO and UNICEF, they have modules which are supposed to be implemented by all schools worldwide.
Okay, thank you.
Just give anything a go that you feel comfortable as well. You know, it doesn't have to be with even the formal things we've discussed tonight. It's really what will work for your students, and that can be different every year too. You have a different class every year.
Those interested could also just use the reference that Giselle has suggested. Look up Mark Brackett, Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, his book Permission to Feel, and just let it snowball in, you know, Google, and see where it leads you from there.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend as just a beginning to start from there too. And the book is a bit of a read, but I found it very beneficial. It's more based on you trying to assess yourself, because the theory is you've got to get yourself right before you have any chance to teach or help others.
I just wanted to go to the last few questions that Giselle asked in her presentation, which I think are very important for us to ask ourselves as teachers, as parents, as brothers, sisters, as children. These are good questions that I think kind of sum up what we're looking at, and maybe we can conclude the evening on that note, if that's all right. But there is one more question. I guess we'll take one more question.
Hi, Giselle. I would like to ask, what is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on SES skills and also the work readiness among young adults in tertiary study education? Yeah.
Thank you. It's very bad. COVID really put a stop to a lot of the pre-accredited training we were doing back home. I can't speak for, again, elsewhere, but for us, we were not allowed to teach in classes physically almost at all. All classes had to go online. So I've got other fellows that were looking into how to teach digitally, everyone else could do that except me, because my students sometimes don't know how to use a computer, or my main class was learning how to use a computer 101 if you've never touched a mouse before. Well, we can't do Zoom if you don't know how to do that. So that was actually a really big barrier for us. And for most of it, we had to wait it out. It depended on the local laws with what we were allowed to do, and that would change all the time. With more vulnerable communities, we could sometimes argue that we could look after them more and run classes. So maybe the computer courses weren't deemed as vulnerable because they were older populations that needed help. They were more preferred to stay home. But with my refugee groups that needed to learn English, they were given priority. So I was able to run an English class during the pandemic. But it was very hard. And I don't know how it played out here, but in Victoria, we were one of the hardest hit states in Australia. We had some of the strictest laws. We had lockdown after lockdown like no other state in Australia. And I even got married on a day that they put us into lockdown 2 hours after. So it wasn't fun. We got 2 hours warning and that was it. And it could go on for weeks or months. So a lot of students actually got really scared and some have even developed a fear of going outside. So we've got a lot of anxiety, a lot of generalised anxiety disorder, a lot of phobias. We're yet to scratch that surface, and I couldn't say the real damage of that, because if they're not coming to our centre, I don't know. So to answer that question, it was really bad. And it will take years to come. That is an intergenerational trauma. That will be. It's not as much of a physical threat now, but it will be a mental threat for many years to come. Absolutely. Because we had shelves empty. We had no food, no supplies. Things just disappeared. Critical medicines people didn't have. It was... And even if you had money to pay for these things, you couldn't get them. That was never before for us. So, yeah, it's a trauma.
Sorry, in connection with the pandemic and the lockdown, it's okay. Oh, recording. You need to record everything. Okay, I just found something that Penang has done. Maybe some of us know and some of us do not know. As a result of the pandemic, Penang initiated an ongoing program which is called Penang Youth Resilience Superstars for those aged between 15 to 35, to teach them how to cope with stress and trauma and, be better equipped with life skills and know how to self-regulate, emotions, understand own emotions and the emotions of others so that you can better relate with people. Yeah. So this program is ongoing. So good to know that Penang has initiated this.
Definitely.
Okay. If there are no more questions and comments, I think we'll conclude. But don't worry, I think Giselle would be very open to giving perhaps her email in case you would like to follow up with questions, whether for your personal or for your professional development. Maybe, and we'd be very interested in your research and how that develops over time. So don't be a stranger. Don't forget us. Keep in touch. And again, thank you all very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.